High-earning millennials are behind the big thinking in the northern office and residential markets. But are there enough of them? I'm David Thame, analysis editor at Place North. In today's Place podcast, we'll explore how the property market increasingly depends on wealthy 20-somethings. We'll also take a look at the shrinking pool of ready-to-rent northern sheds and glance at one skyscraper developer's success winning funding from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. We used to call them yuppies, young urban professionals, and the expression implied some scorn. Today the scorn is long gone. High-earning millennials are what the property market is all about. Earlier this week, the Office for National Statistics published data on graduate creation and graduate retention, data that will determine what offices and apartment blocks get built in the next few years. The ONS looked at people born in the early 1990s, glanced at their GCSE results and wondered where they were by 2018-19. Were they in the same town or somewhere else? And if they were somewhere else, where? So what did they discover? That the big cities do well. Manchester enjoys the dream outcome of having more graduates than it produces, with high net inward migration of graduates plus high levels of retention. The same goes for non-graduates with advanced qualifications. In numbers, that means about 1/3 of Manchester school kids become graduates and 3/4 of them stay put in the city. Meanwhile, the city sucked in graduates from elsewhere. New arrivals provided a 91% boost to graduate numbers. Leeds comes out much the same. A few less Leeds kids become graduates and rather fewer of those stay put, but it does very well at attracting newcomers. In 2018-19, 64% of graduates and 33% of qualified non-graduates living in Leeds had moved there from somewhere else. In Manchester, the figures are 61% of graduates and 34% of qualified non-graduates living in Manchester had moved there from elsewhere. And you get the idea. Graduates like Liverpool and Manchester. Sheffield is a step down from there. 50% of graduates, 21% of qualified non-graduates come from outside the city. Liverpool another step lower than that, 34% and 15%, and then it falls off a cliff. Bradford is 14% and 15%. A lot of higher level thinking in the property market turns on these numbers. And top of the pile of reports is one from the Resolution Foundation that pointed out that the UK's regional cities were miles behind productivity in London or comparable regional cities elsewhere in Europe. The foundation posed itself a thought experiment using Manchester and Birmingham as surrogates for the regional economy. What would it take, they asked, to reduce Greater Manchester's productivity gap with London to 20%? The answer, among other things, was increasing Greater Manchester's graduate workforce by as many as 180,000. This would take graduate employment up from today's 37%, putting it in line with higher performers like Glasgow. And of course, 180,000 more graduates means finding places for them to live and work. Which sounds fine, but it gets complicated. Manchester City Council is now brewing a new economic strategy and has latched onto the Foundation's report and commissioned property agency OBI to turn it into office market floor space numbers. These are bound to be large. You can't put 180,000 people in a city without using lots of floor space. This comes on top of an office development target in the newly approved Places for Everyone City Region Spatial Strategy, which is also pretty high. The combined effect of these two potentially very big numbers for new office market supply was a bout of nerves. The words oversupply have been mentioned. A rearguard action from office market participants busy making a case for measured, slowly does-it office development has been underway for the last few months. It was heavily in progress at MIPIM, and some of those involved think the City Council's top team now understands the risks of betting the farm on building a megaton of graduate-friendly offices. The message is slowly being absorbed, one told Subplot. It's not quite so clear whether they grasp the opportunity to refurbish the less good but modern office floor space, but we'll see. The residential element of the equation where do you get all these graduates to live, is also complicated. Co-living, the fancy rental flat share concept, has been touted as having a prominent role here. Now, some cities, Manchester and Sheffield city councils, have said yes, others have said no or maybe. The viability of co-living will largely depend on how much inward graduate migration a city has, and is likely to have in the future. Research this week from Gerald Eve shows just how enormously reliant co-living is on a vast supply of, on average, 28-year-olds earning, on average, £37,000, and most striking of all, how far it depends on overseas graduates of about 28 years old, earning £37,500. Gerald Eve suggests London could have about 600,000 co-living beds. We'll only in fact have 11,500 by 2027, and they posit there's room for growth, much of it to plug a gap in purpose-built student housing. Now, in the north, things won't come out quite like that. The average wage for a 28-year-old doesn't get anywhere near £37,000 in the northeast or the northwest or in Yorkshire. They're all about £10,000 short. Now, the data is a touch dated, but the point remains valid. Wages outside London are lower. Some 28-year-olds do indeed earn enough, but in the northwest, it's only the 90th percentile. That's the very thinnest top slice who take home enough to pay the co-living bills. That means they earn about £40,000 a year. And in Yorkshire, it's also the 90th percentile. That's about £37,000. In contrast, in London, it's the 70th percentile. That's a much larger share of a much larger group. So the target here is a very small slice of top earning graduates. Compared to London, there are fewer overseas 20-somethings in regional cities, and that too will have a significant impact on demand. There's also the problem that the regional build-to-rent product has evolved to meet much of the need that co-living aims to meet. Our scheme has been launched this week. CDL Hospitality Trust's The Castings provides a mass of co-living style facilities for residents of its 77 one-bed and 39 studio apartments. Rents are £1,150 a month for a studio, £1,250 for a one-bed apartment. If housing is assumed to be about a third of post-tax income, and is often more, that implies annual incomes before tax of about £54,000, which is not just at the top of the scale for the 22 to 29 age group, but way above it. High-earning millennials are the holy grail of property development. Whether there's enough of them outside London to do the heavy lifting is still far from clear. And it's an open question what kind of city you get if you focus heavily on young professionals. It may not end up being the most inclusive or diverse of spaces. And now your weekly rundown of what's going up and what's heading the other way in the Place North elevator. Doors closing, going up. Warehouse availability in the north is much tighter than in the south or the Midlands, and the smaller the shed, the less of them there are to let. Intriguing regional data from CoStar on the availability of all sizes and ages of warehousing reflects the last 3 years of Sheds A Go-Go development. In pretty much every size range, the north has less floor space on the market than other shed hotspots, largely because it never got quite so hot in the first place. The northeast has the tightest market in the north of the UK, with an availability rate of 4.3%. With starts low and slow, it won't grow much in the immediate future. The northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber, which have the next lowest availability rates, are about 4.5%. Again, starts are down 40% on last year, so expect the availability rate to go down and not up. The striking gap in availability is under 50,000 square feet and between 100 and 250,000 square feet. As for the really big sheds, US private equity is buying up logistics names like they're in a fever. Wincanton is in the midst of a £760 million offer. DX was sold at 30 times its earnings forecast, the kind of valuation that justifies the exploding head emoji. When the new owners come to their senses, will they want more big sheds? The Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which means Mayor Burnham and the 10 Greater Manchester Council leaders, meet tomorrow to nod through another tranche of loans to apartment developer Renica. This time it's £140 million from its Housing Investment Fund to back 2 more towers at Great Jackson Street, one of 50 stories and one of 61 stories. The fund has already backed 8 Renica schemes. So far, the Manchester skyscraper developer has scooped £508 million of the £942 million pot. In strictly commercial terms, the Combined Authority is certainly getting its money back. And Renica isn't doing badly either. So that's it for this week. We've seen how the property market is in thrall to high-earning 20-somethings, how hard it is to find a warehouse anywhere in the north, and how much politicians in Greater Manchester like Renica skyscrapers. For more about the built environment in the north, visit placenorth.co.uk. I'm David Thame, and thank you for listening.